My name is Layla, I'm 38, and last night, my company went public. The press is calling it a milestone for women in tech. I just call it the end of a very long road. Right now, I'm sitting in a quiet hotel suite overlooking the skyline. The champagne the investors sent is still cold in the bucket. I haven't touched it. Instead, I'm staring at a message that just lit up my phone. It's from my father. Just 6 words. Proud of you. Call when you can. He didn't call when I got my first grant. Or when I quietly bought my first office space. Or when I worked 2 jobs just to keep my servers online. The last time we really spoke, he said, "You'll end up broke with those ideas." I never replied to that. Not with words, anyway. I grew up in a house where certainty was considered a virtue, where the path to success came pre-drawn: good grades, respectable degree, stable job, safe retirement. Anything outside of that line, well, it wasn't just discouraged. It was quietly erased. My father worked as a senior auditor at a mid-sized firm in Connecticut. Numbers made sense to him. Life, to him, was a balance sheet, measurable, predictable, and controlled. My mother stayed home, managed the house with precision, and took pride in being efficient. She measured love through order lunches, packed, laundry folded, birthdays remembered. Affection, though, was always ... muted. Then there was Ryan, my older brother by 3 years. He was the golden thread in the family fabric. Captain of the debate team. Early admission to Columbia. Dad's proudest line was, "Ryan's going places." I heard it so often I thought it was stitched into our wallpaper. From a young age, I knew I didn't fit that template. While Ryan recited mock trial arguments at the dinner table, I was sketching websites on the back of my notebooks. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted to build something that worked, something that helped people, something that looked like it came from the future. At 16, I spent the summer teaching myself to code, using free tutorials online. I borrowed an old laptop from a neighbor who was upgrading. It had missing keys and a fan that sounded like a small plane. But it booted up, and that was enough. I built my first basic app that summer. It was clunky, bare bones, really, but it let users save and sort notes with colored tags, and it actually worked. I was proud of it. Nervous, but proud. I showed my dad after dinner one evening, standing in the hallway while he watched the evening news. He gave it a glance, then shook his head and said, "So, like a fancy notepad, you wasted your summer on that." I remember standing there, blinking at the screen, the quiet sound of the TV filling the silence. It wasn't the words that cut the deepest, it was the tone. That thin, dismissive tone that made me feel small. Like I had embarrassed him by caring about the wrong thing. Ryan, meanwhile, got a brand new MacBook when he started law school. I asked for a used desktop for my birthday the same year. My mother said, "We just can't justify that kind of expense for something so experimental." When college came, I applied for a computer science program at a public university. I got in with a partial scholarship. It wasn't enough to cover everything, and I asked them if they could co-sign a small student loan so I wouldn't have to work too many jobs during the semester. Dad didn't hesitate. "No," he said, "you chose this path. And frankly, I don't believe it'll lead anywhere. I won't enable a bad decision." I said thank you and walked away. I didn't cry. I'd learned by then that tears in our house were seen as guilt trips. Emotion was weakness. And weakness didn't belong in a serious family. So I worked. I waitressed 3 nights a week and did basic freelance design work when I could find clients online. I rented a windowless room in a cramped apartment shared with 4 other girls. The first winter, I wore my coat to bed because the heating barely worked. But I didn't stop building. Every free hour I had, I coded. I read documentation, watched lectures on open Wi-Fi connections, studied every mistake I made until I could fix it faster the next time. I wasn't dreaming of millions. I was dreaming of freedom. Of proving, if only to myself, that I wasn't broken for wanting a life that looked different from the one they designed. When I got my first check for a freelance dashboard one built for a small e-commerce store, I was so excited I called home. My mother picked up. I told her, I just got paid for building a product from scratch. She paused and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Ryan just got offered a summer associate position at a major firm. Isn't that exciting?" That call ended quickly. That year, Thanksgiving was the same as always. Ryan held court, describing courtroom simulations and professors who thought he was exceptional. My parents beamed. I sat at the end of the table, sipping cold cider. listening to them talk about his new apartment in the city. When my mother asked me how school was, I said, "It's good. I launched a student productivity platform for a small cohort last week." She smiled politely and asked, "Are you still doing those little websites?" Little websites, they weren't cruel, they just couldn't see me, or wouldn't. I'm still not sure which is worse. There were good moments too, quiet ones. Like, the night I stayed up to help a fellow student finish a portfolio site so she could apply for internships, or the time a professor told me my UI design was more intuitive than anything he'd seen from grad students. Those were small flames I kept close to my chest. But every holiday, every birthday, every phone call was a reminder that in their eyes, Ryan was the story worth telling. I was the side note. The phase they were patiently waiting for me to outgrow. Even when I graduated magna cum laude, with a portfolio of real work under my belt, no one from my family came to the ceremony. My mother sent a card. My father sent a short email. "Glad you saw it through." Ryan got a car when he passed the bar. I bought myself a used bike to get 2 interviews. At the time, I didn't tell anyone how much it hurt. I wore that silence like armor. I told myself I didn't need their validation, but that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I wanted one moment, just one, where they looked at me, not past me, and said, "We see you, we're proud of you." That moment never came, so I learned to stop expecting it. But I never stopped building. After college, I stayed in the city. The rent was high, the winters were brutal, and the job market wasn't exactly kind to new grads with no formal connections. But I found a small contract gig doing front-end development for a local digital agency. It paid the bills, barely. On the side, I kept working on an idea I'd been carrying around for years, something that began as a scattered notebook sketch back in school, a platform that would give independent creators real tools to manage their work, build portfolios, and get paid fairly. Simple on the surface, but underneath, it had potential. I could feel it. One Sunday, a few months after graduation, I went home for dinner. My mom had made roast chicken and sweet potatoes, Ryan's favorite. The table was set like always, crisp napkins, wine glasses, the good plates they saved for guests we rarely had. It smelled like every Sunday from my childhood, but I already knew how the evening would go. Ryan had just closed on a second investment property with his business partner. He was full of updates and plans. My parents listened attentively, asking questions, nodding with admiration. I waited until dessert to bring it up my idea. I explained it slowly, clearly, not in tech jargon, but in real terms. How so many artists, writers, and freelancers struggle to manage their income, their portfolios, their relationships with clients. How I wanted to create a platform that combined scheduling, invoicing, content protection, and community. One dashboard. One login. One clean, honest space to work. My mom stirred her tea. My father leaned back and said, "So, like Fiverr?" "No," I said, keeping my tone even. "It's more like an operating system for creatives. The goal isn't to farm out cheap labor, it's to build sustainability for people who work independently." Ryan smirked. "Sounds complicated. You think people would actually pay for that?" "I do," I said. "I've done the research. I've interviewed users. I just need enough to build a working prototype and MVP and test it in the wild." My mother tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to be gentle. "Sweetheart, don't you think you're overcomplicating things? Maybe you should just find a stable job first. Get settled, then think about all this later." I paused. "I've been working full-time. Nights, weekends. I'm not asking for a handout. Just a small loan to get started. I've saved some, but not enough to hire a back-end developer and cover legal fees." My father folded his hands. "We've already helped you through school. You chose a path we didn't understand, and we respected that. But we're not going to fund a project that sounds more like a hobby than a plan. You need to get serious." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The chill was in how final they sounded. "I am serious," I said quietly. "You'll understand one day," he replied, cutting into his pie. And that was it. My proposal ended over a half-eaten slice of apple pie. I helped clear the dishes in silence. My mom kissed me on the cheek at the door. "Just keep looking for jobs." "Okay." A week later, I was scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break. Ryan had posted a photo, him and his partner, standing in front of a glossy new duplex, grinning like real estate kings. The caption said, "Huge thanks to the family for believing in us again. Couldn't have done it without your help." I read it 3 times before I closed the app. That night, I called my mother and asked carefully if they had helped him finance it. There was a pause, then a soft, "It's different, sweetheart. Real estate has structure. It's a smart investment." I didn't reply. I just said I was busy and hung up. That was the last time I called home without a reason. A few weeks later, I visited for my father's birthday. I brought a simple gift-engraved cufflink sand, stayed quiet through dinner. They asked about work, but only in passing. Ryan had new updates, market trends, rental strategies, lawyer stories. The spotlight followed him like it always had. After dinner, I was pouring myself a glass of water in the kitchen when I heard my father in the living room, talking to a family friend on the phone. "She's chasing delusions, I think. These apps and platforms, none of it's real. One day she'll learn, and maybe then she settled down." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, the glass still in my hand, the faucet dripping softly behind me. That was the moment the last fragile thread broke. I stopped visiting after that. I didn't announce it. I didn't start a fight. I just let the silence grow. When they texted, I replied, politely but without warmth. I focused on work. I focused on building. I applied to every accelerator program I could find, pitching my idea late at night in shared offices and rented co-working spaces. Most said no, but one didn't. A small program in Boston took me and offered a $15,000 microgrant and 3 months of mentorship. It wasn't flashy, but it was everything. I moved without telling anyone. I didn't post it online. I didn't even tell the few friends I had from school. I poured everything I had into it. I learned to build faster, design smarter, manage feedback. I met another developer, older, kind, razor sharpened. We started working together quietly. We didn't talk about scale or exits. We just worked. Every night, when I sat back in my chair, exhausted, I thought about that line, "She's chasing delusions." It echoed in the background like static. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. Every skipped dinner, every forgotten birthday, every time I went home and sat quietly in a room that was never really me, I poured all of it into the code. I was still chasing something, but it wasn't approval anymore. It was freedom. I was 10 when I first felt it, that strange hollow drop in my chest that comes when you realize the people you love most might never really see you. It was a Saturday afternoon, the leaves outside had turned brittle and red, and I had spent the better part of the week working on something in my room. I'd taken apart an old flashlight, some cardboard, and a broken toy fan, and pieced together a crude little air cooler that ran on AA batteries. It didn't do much, barely stirred the airbud in my mind. It was an invention. I still remember the way I walked into the living room, clutching it gently like it might fall apart. My dad was watching the news, half sunk into the couch, sipping his coffee. My mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she rinsed vegetables. "Dad," I said, standing just off to the side. "Can I show you something I made?" He didn't look away from the screen. "What is it?" "It's kind of like a fan, but for your desk. I used the parts from that flashlight in the garage, remember? The one that stopped working." I held it out, both hands supporting it like a science fair project. He glanced at it briefly, then back to the TV. "Does it work?" "Sort of," I said. "It's not very strong, but it moves the air a little." "I wired it with." "That's nice," he said flatly. "Why don't you go help your mother with the dishes?" That was it. He didn't even ask how I made it. Didn't touch it. Didn't really see it. The news kept playing behind him, some story about gas prices and a mayoral race. I remember standing there a moment longer, hoping maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe he'd say, "Wait, let me see that." But he didn't. I turned, walked to the kitchen, and helped dry the silverware. Later that night, I put the fan on the shelf next to my bed. It stayed there for years, collecting dust but never forgotten. That moment didn't crush me, but it marked something. It taught me that curiosity wasn't valued in our house unless it followed a specific script, one they approved of. My brother's debates, always front and center. His interest in government and policy, applauded at every dinner. My little inventions, barely tolerated. Background noise, so I stopped sharing. Not out loud, at least by the time I was 13. I had learned to borrow interest from school library computers. I'd sneak into the lab during lunch and read articles about programming. Watch old YouTube tutorials when no one was around. I started scribbling down code in a notebook. hiding it between algebra worksheets. At 14, I convinced my neighbor, Mr. Darnell, to lend me his old Toshiba laptop. He was upgrading to something faster, and I told him I needed it for school. He didn't ask questions, just handed it over with a smile and said, "Knock yourself out." It was slow. The battery lasted barely an hour, but it worked. And for the first time, I had my own quiet world to explore. I'd stay up late, long after the rest of the house was asleep, coding in the soft blue glow of that old screen. I'd build basic pages, ugly ones, at first, but the logic made sense. To me, HTML felt like a language I already spoke. CSS was like decorating a room you built yourself, and it felt good. Not flashy, not performative, just mine. The summer I turned 16, I found an online coding competition for teens. The challenge was simple: build something useful with limited tools. I built a scheduling app for students, something basic that helped keep track of homework, tests, and club meetings. I poured myself into it, wrote every line of code from scratch, debugged it over and over until it stopped crashing. One missed a few pool days with friends, skipped a cousin's birthday party, and slept very little. When the results came in, I had placed second, out of hundreds. They sent me a digital certificate and a small cash prize, $50. But it wasn't the money that mattered. I printed the certificate on our family printer and left it on the kitchen counter, taped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. It was the first time I felt I had done something real, something worth notice. The next day, it was gone. I found it in the recycling bin under a grocery list written in my mother's handwriting. She had used the backside to jot down ingredients for chicken soup. I didn't ask why, I didn't say a word. I just folded it quietly and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. That was the second moment. There were others, too. Smaller ones. The time I got asked to help a teacher redesign a classroom site and my parents brushed it off with, "Don't get too distracted." Or the time I was invited to a free weekend coding camp and my father refused to drive me, saying, "That's not where your future is." Each one left a mark. Not loud, not violent, but there. I think people underestimate what silence can do. It doesn't just sit quietly in a corner. It seeps in. It rewrites how you see yourself. It tells you, day after day, that the things you care about don't matter. That maybe you don't matter, least not in the way they want you to. And so I adapted. I stopped offering up pieces of myself for inspection. I learned to keep my ambitions close, locked tight, protected from casual dismissal. But in doing that, I also found something else: resolve. I learned to plan in silence, to build under the weight of being overlooked. I trained myself not to flinch when they changed the subject or smiled politely and turned away. Because deep down, even then, I believed there would come a day when I wouldn't need their approval. Not because I didn't want it, but because I'd outgrown the version of myself that begged for it. And the funny thing about small heartbreaks is, they teach you how to keep going, not with anger, but with purpose. I spent the next several years living leaner than most people my age. While friends posted about ski trips and destination weddings, I was splitting rent on a one-bedroom with a woman I barely saw. My meals were mostly rice, frozen vegetables, and dollar coffee. I didn't mind. Every dollar I saved went into the platform. I called it Nest. Not because it sounded techy or disruptive, but because that's what I wanted it to feel like for the people who would use it. A nest, a safe place to create, organize, and grow. It wasn't perfect at first. The early version was clunky and awkward. I remember launching the beta and watching a wave of feedback come in, some of it harsh, some confused, some curious. But underneath it all, I saw the pattern. People wanted this. Not because it was slick, but because it was honest. That was the difference. Through an accelerator program, I met to mentors Rachel, a product strategist, and Mikkel, a back-end engineer, who had worked in startups longer than I'd been out of school. They didn't offer me money. What they gave me was better time, challenge, clarity. Mikkel became my co-founder. We split everything 50-50 and agreed that no investor would get more say than we did together. Rachel coached us through our first major pivot when we realized most creators didn't just need organization, they needed protection, contracts, watermarking, client tracking. We rebuilt from the ground up. It took 9 months. We launched again. That's when it started to move. Freelancers began using us to invoice clients. Illustrators used us to track where their work was shared. Writers sent contracts with built-in payment timers. The feedback was real, raw, grateful. I didn't celebrate. Not then. I was still holding my breath. Then came a call from a small VC firm in Chicago. They weren't flashy, but they were honest. One of their analysts had used Ness for her own side hustle and pushed it onto their radar. We raised our seed round, modest, intentional. I stayed out of the press. I didn't need the world to know. Not yet. But the numbers didn't stay quiet. Within 18 months, we hit our first $1 million in revenue. Then 3, then 5. Investors noticed. Users told their networks. The press called. I said no to most interviews. I didn't want to be a headline. I wanted to keep building. Then we got our Series A, and this time, the media insisted. The creator economy's new backbone. They called us. My face was on the cover of a business magazine. My inbox flooded overnight. Strangers congratulated me, and then one message stood out. It was from Ryan. Hey Layla, saw your article. Really impressive stuff. Let me know if you're ever open to helping me with this new real estate platform I've been developing. Would love to get your thoughts. Maybe even see if there's synergy. I read it 3 times. No apology. No mention of the duplex. Just a gentle nudge, like he was offering me a chance. I wrote back. Briefly. Thanks for the kind words, Ryan. I'm not looking to invest in external projects at this time. Hope all is well. He didn't respond. A week later, my parents sent flowers to our office. White lilies and a note. We always knew you were special. Let's reconnect soon, love, Mom and Dad. It landed like a soft thud in my chest. I stared at those words. Always knew you were special and felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not relief, just distance. I waited 3 days. Then I texted my mother. I'll be in town next week. Let's have dinner. Just the 3 of us. She responded within minutes. Of course, we'd love that. We're so proud of you. I chose the restaurant. A small, quiet Italian place I used to walk by in college but never had the money to enter. I reserved the back table, white tablecloth, candlelight, quiet hum of soft jazz. When they arrived, my father hugged me first, a little too firmly. My mother touched my cheek and said, "Look at you, so polished." I smiled politely. We ordered. They asked about the company, about my co-founder, about how I handled stress. They spoke in admiring tones, as if they'd always believed I was destined for this. As if the version of me who begged for a $5,000 loan had never existed. Halfway through the main course, my father leaned back and said, "You always had this spark. I remember that fan you made when you were a kid, the little one with batteries. You were always building something." I placed my fork down gently. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a small black frame wrapped in cloth, and set it on the table. Inside was a photo I had taken with an old flip phone. My 10-year-old self. Holding that makeshift fan in both hands, grinning. The photo was faded and pixelated, but clear enough. They both leaned in. "I brought this," I said quietly, "not for nostalgia, but to return something." My mother blinked. "What do you mean?" I looked at my father. "You said, go help your mother with the dishes. You didn't look at it. Not once. And later, when I built things you didn't understand, you dismissed them too." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. "I didn't come here for congratulations. I came to return your words. I carried them every day. When I didn't sleep, when I failed, when I rebuilt. They followed me into every pitch, every prototype, every boardroom. You didn't believe in what I was building. And maybe that's fine. But don't rewrite it now." They were quiet. The restaurant hummed softly around us. "I'm not here for apologies," I added. "I'm just making sure I don't carry those words into the next chapter." I folded my napkin, signaled for the check, and paid the bill in full. My mother tried to speak once more as I stood, but I simply said, "Take care of yourselves," and turned to leave. I didn't cry in the cab. I didn't feel triumphant. Just clear. And that clarity, after all those years, felt like something I had earned. My apartment now isn't large. It's not glass-walled or perched above a skyline. It's on the second floor of a quiet brick building in Cambridge, overlooking a narrow street lined with trees that bloom pink in spring. The floors creak a little. The windows let in too much morning light. But it's mine. There's no art on the walls yet. I've been slow to decorate, but there's one shelf, right by my desk, that I set up on day one. On it sits a single black frame. Inside is the printed certificate from that summer coding competition. The one my mother once used as scrap paper. The creases still show, faint, but present. I didn't try to smooth them out. They belong there, proof that it survived. Next to it is a second frame, a photo of that little air cooling fan I made when I was 10. I took a better version of it years later with my phone, before it finally fell apart. It looks like nothing to most people: wires, plastic, taped edges, but to me, it was the first thing I built that worked. I keep them both there. Not as trophies, not even as reminders of pain, but as markers. That girl alone, in her room with a rattling laptop and borrowed batteries, she didn't have applause. She didn't have funding or backup plans. What she had was curiosity. And a kind of quiet determination that, if I'm honest, I sometimes wish I could still access that easily. Now, when I wake up, I no longer think about proving anything, not to my parents, not to Ryan, not to the industry or the headlines. I still get texts from my mother every now and then. Photos of hydrangeas blooming in her garden. Or an article she thinks I'd like. Sometimes even a message from my dad, thinking of you. Hope you're well, I reply. Kindly, briefly, there's no anger left in me. But I don't visit. I don't offer more than I'm willing to give. Forgiveness, for me, didn't come through confrontation. It came through creation. Through giving myself what they never did. A few months ago, I quietly launched something new. Not a product, this time, a grant. It's small, for now. Funded directly from my dividends, managed anonymously. It goes to girls aged 12 to 18 who show interest in STEM but lack support at home. No essays, no interviews, just a nomination and a small portfolio. Enough to buy a laptop. Enroll in a course. Get internet for a year. I call it the Nestling Grant. No one knows it's mine, but every time I send one out, I think of that 10-year-old me, standing in the hallway, holding her invention like it mattered. Because it did. Even if no one told her so. These days, my life is quieter. Fewer flights, fewer meetings, more mornings at home with coffee and soft music. Sometimes, I'll sit at my desk and open a blank file. I'll write a few lines of code. Nothing groundbreaking, just something small that works. Something that feels like mine. It's strange how full circle things become when you stop running. Used to believe I was chasing a dream, but the truth is, I was building a way out. And now that I'm here, I don't need the applause. I just need a quiet room, a clean line of code, and the soft hum of something finally working.